Welcome to the Business of Apparel podcast. This is the place to learn how to start and scale your own apparel brand and fill it with loyal customers for years to come. I'm your host, Rachel Erickson, owner and CEO of Unmarked Street. I can't wait to share this episode with you. Welcome back to the Business of Apparel podcast. Today, I am super excited to announce that we have developed and created a brand new free gift for our community, and we are offering it to you today. I have been able to really get into a couple of the other great community freelancers and consultants websites, really looking into the types of things that they've been offering to the community and trying to figure out kind of how Unmarked Street and the Business of Apparel really fits into that. And one tool that I have been really happy to find kind of consistent across the board from several different people are these amazing development roadmaps. So kind of outlining the steps that it will take to create your own apparel line from beginning to end. Like, what do we do inside the apparel industry? What are the ways to get from here to there? What do we call them? What are the technical names? And then just a lot of really great descriptions of what those things mean. So one that I really always love, if you go to pointsofmeasure.com, Natalie's garment development roadmap is one of the first ones that I came across, and I highly recommend that you check hers out. It is very robust. She gives a ton of detail. Points of Measure is just such a great kind of beacon in the apparel consulting space. I've spoken to Natalie before, and she's just such a lovely human being. And so I definitely encourage you to go check hers out too. But what I started to notice was that my personal process for apparel development is a little bit different from what I've been seeing out in the rest of the consulting space. And so I ended up building one that really reflected what I wanted to put out into the world as the new, maybe, apparel product development blueprint. So if you go to thebusinessofapparel.com, you kind of can't miss it. We've made it one of those lovely little hovering screens that comes up after you've been on the homepage for 5 seconds, and you can download for free. We just want to capture your email to come into the community so that you can be a part of our groups and hear all of the latest news that we're doing at the Business of Apparel. So just, you can put your email in and we will send you that free download that you can see. And what I wanted to go through a little bit today was what makes my blueprint different from others. So if you are seeing some of these blueprints or roadmaps out there, you'll probably notice that a lot of them jump in right off the bat with like creative thinking. And this is something that is definitely true. You have to start with an idea and you have to kind of start with inspiration. And so I am acknowledging that that is definitely the first step. You kind of need to have inspiration. You need to have an idea. And so our blueprint does start there as well. However, a lot of people then move you straight into design phases, starting to think about creatively, how can you create your product? How can you design your product? What kind of competitors are you looking at? And how can you compare your product idea to theirs? And what I really want to encourage people to do is to hold off on that creative step and really think about your numbers first. So this comes from a lot of advice that I got too when I started Unmarked Street and my business. I felt like I had all of the details in my head. I knew what I wanted to do. It was going to be easy, right? Like I already knew exactly how it was going to work out. So why put it on paper? Like that was just going to be such a waste of time. And it was quickly realized that it was not a waste of time to put together a formal business plan. And I have recorded a previous podcast episode, if you haven't listened to it yet, how I put together my business plan and how I recommend that you do the same if you are building an apparel line specifically. So go back and listen to that one. That is definitely something there, but that definitely trickled into this new blueprint. Without knowing your numbers up front, without knowing what kind of funding you could have on hand, what kind of savings do you have that you want to put into your apparel line, what are the key numbers that you need to be able to hit before you start getting into that creative process is really, really important in my book. So again, in my humble opinion, I think if you don't have numbers on paper, if you don't have a business plan on paper, and if you don't know how much you can afford to make and purchase, then you're setting yourself up for failure right off the bat. And it is part of my philosophy that numbers don't lie. And if you can really set up your numbers as that North Star that you need to understand what is workable for you and what isn't, you are going to be setting yourself up for success that so many other brands don't even consider. So let's kind of look at this from a practical point of view. I see a lot of clients and a lot of potential people coming into the community coming to me asking questions about the design phase that they're in for their collection. And they are really aspirational. We all are. If you're an entrepreneur, you're an aspirational person. You're really tenacious. You want to get things done. You're excited about all of the opportunity that is coming up. And trust me, I am right there with you. But jumping straight into the design phase tends to encourage people to design and develop too much right off the bat. So we go in and we say, we're going to create this run line, and we want a singlet, and we want a t-shirt, and we want a long sleeve, and we want a thermal. And then we need to do that on the bottoms too, right? So we need a 3-inch run short, a 5-inch run short, and we need tights, and we need bike shorts, and we need socks, and we need hats. And so you put all of that into your design plan, and you start designing all of these amazing products. Well, once you start to learn the numbers of what it's going to cost you to go to your manufacturer and figure out how much do I need to be able to pay up front to now get all of these products to me after they've been designed, let's not even talk about production, even just your development fees. Can you afford to do all of that? I'm betting you can't. And there is a great mentor of mine, Kelly Roach. I have been a part of the Kelly Roach coaching community for quite a while now. She is someone that I kind of found right off the bat as I started my company, and I've been a part of her ecosystem since then. I just think she is one of the most on the nose entrepreneurial coaches. She kind of is really great at seeing trends in the industry and understanding what's coming up next and what is super relevant. And so I find myself definitely gravitating toward her. I was listening to her podcast the other day, and she was talking a lot about developing her own apparel line, and how after they learned about the costing and all of the numbers, it was really important for them to understand that it would have been smarter for them to choose 1 or 2 of their most viable products up front instead of developing everything that they developed up front. They could have saved a lot of time. They could have saved a lot of money. They might have seen profitability a little bit faster. And so these are all of the reasons why I really encourage you to put that plan on paper, know your numbers, because 9 times out of 10, instead of being able to develop everything that you have on your wish list, you are also going to find that sticking with your 1 or 2 top viable products is the most important way to start. And so that is how my blueprint starts. And that's, I think, what makes it really unique. I don't encourage you to go straight into designing or into your creative processes. I really want you to understand your numbers before you get there. The number 2 reason why our blueprint is really different is that I am going to really start encouraging and talking a lot about 3D design. So 3D design is absolutely, I believe, the future of the apparel industry. If you can put your development process into a 3D development timeline, there are 2 huge things that are going to happen for you right off the bat. Number 1, you are going to reduce your carbon footprint immediately. All of those extra samples that you might be making in first, second, or third proto rounds, and then essentially go straight into the garbage because they're not the correct fit, not the correct construction. There's something about them that needed to be fixed before you could get in your size run. All of those samples all of a sudden turn into 3D renderings, which are all done digitally. We're not making fabric waste. We're not creating all of this stuff that ends up in landfills because we can't do anything with them. Once they've been cut up, marked up, pinned up, all they end up doing essentially is being garbage, which is just really, really tragic to me. So immediately you become much more sustainable by adding 3D garment design and development into your process. And the second thing that it does is it knocks your timeline down by months. If you're able to find a great pattern engineer and a great 3D designer who can help you visualize your designs on the screen before you start making any physical samples, all of a sudden you go from maybe a 4 or 5 month development timeline down to 1 or 2 months. Now, I know a lot of people out there are talking about, I found this factory who can do development for me in just a month, and then they're going to produce for me in 60 days. So if I start today, I'm going to have my product in 3 months. Now, I really encourage you to question any manufacturers who are giving you that advice, because that timeline to me is completely unrealistic. I've never seen it. I have seen some really fast timelines happen, and they are extremely purposeful. So when I work with a client who has a 5 to 6 month start date to end date timeline, we put that into our plan up front. We know even if a first proto comes in looking not quite right, we don't have time to fix everything. So we have to be really cognizant about the decisions that we're making to move into a size run right away, instead of being able to get a second prototype. And what does it mean if you absolutely need a second prototype because that first proto was really rough? Again, all of those questions need to be answered. I really encourage you to consider a 9 month to a year timeline if you're doing traditional development. But I am going to start teaching people that 3D development and design can knock several months off of that. And so your entire upfront building of the product is done digitally. It's done much faster. It's done much more sustainably. And so I have a couple of amazing resources that I can give to my clients or share with you if you are interested in learning who you can reach out to do that 3D design and development and get a really solid pattern in place before you even start doing any physical samples. So that's the number 2 reason that my blueprint is a little bit different. And number 3 is because I am really going to start talking about sustainable process across the board. We are no longer going to encourage companies to go out and do catalogs made with physical samples that they needed to send to a photographer. Again, this really comes down to 3D design. If you have a 3D designer and developer who can make something super photorealistic, and I have the resource for you if you need him, all of a sudden you don't need to create paper catalogs. You can do everything digitally. You can go into these systems where you can take these 3D renderings, they'll spin, you can look on the inside, you can see all of the details up close. It's amazing what 3D renderings can do now for you in the way of a digital catalog. And instead of printing all of this paper, and instead of creating all of these hundreds of photo samples that you need to physically handle, send to a photographer, put on mannequins, all of that timeline, it gets reduced. And then you also don't have to discard all of those photo samples that typically aren't 100% production ready. So that is one of the most sustainable processes that we are going to start talking about as we start encouraging people to do photo shoots differently. And then the second one in the way of sustainable process, I know I've talked about this a little bit before, but salesman samples is something else that we're going to start steering people away from. So instead of needing your sales team to have an entire kit of samples, and this can be thousands of samples per brand that they make every year, we're encouraging people again to go digital in these ways. Sales teams know how to use iPads now. They know how to go into shops and show a digital line and have the teams understand what it is that they're buying. If you end up needing to have a few production run samples for someone to take physically, I think there is a really smart way of curating a salesman sample line so that it is just your best items that you want to feature. I'm also going to tell you, and I know I've been talking about this a little bit, but a lot of sales reps aren't even able to take the time to show every single garment that you're sending them in their salesman sample kit. And so all of that trash that ends up being made, because again, a lot of times your salesman samples aren't 100% production ready, we end up throwing them in the garbage. So all of this is mapped out in our new product development blueprint. And then you can go through all the steps in the blueprint of what it takes to develop your apparel line, from soup to nuts, all the way from idea to production, and how I suggest that you do it. My background definitely comes from corporate, right? Like I've been inside these billion-dollar apparel brands. I've been taught by some of the best leaders in the industry how to do all of this work. And now I'm trying to teach smaller brands, sustainably minded brands, how to leverage all of that information into their company so that they can do these processes in a way that have essentially been secrets for a really long time, right? Like we in the apparel industry tend to be really bad at sharing all of the information from brand to brand. Like Patagonia and Nike are not talking to each other saying like, hey, how are you doing proto fittings right now? And hey, how are you doing line planning? Is there anything we can learn from each other? That is very, very rarely happening. I've seen it happen in a couple different instances, and it is a beautiful process when we can benchmark with each other like that. But it is rare. And so what I am trying to do is get that knowledge out into the world, because the brands that need it most are typically not the ones that can go benchmark with a Nike or with a Patagonia or with a Lululemon to understand what they're doing to be the billion-dollar brands that they are. So if you are interested in downloading the new apparel development blueprint, again, you can go to thebusinessofapparel.com. We will put the website in our show notes so that you can click on the link and definitely download this free download. It is something that you can keep and share. I would love to hear what you think about the download. You can definitely comment here in the podcast comments. I would love to hear what you think of this episode and of the free gift that we are offering to you now. Come be a part of our community. I am constantly finding new ways to teach about all of this information, and I really want all of you to have all of this info at your fingertips so that you stop guessing how the rest of us are doing it at the corporate levels of the industry. Wishing you all the best, and we will see you next week on a new episode of the Business of Apparel podcast. Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Apparel podcast. I would so appreciate hearing your thoughts on the show. And if you know someone who could benefit from it, please share it with them. My biggest desire is to help other apparel professionals understand the nuances of our industry so we can all work toward making better product for a better world. If you would like to connect further, I'd love to invite you to send me a message through my website, unmarkstreet.com, where I do weekly trainings through my video channel, a monthly newsletter, and offer so many resources to help you start and scale a profitable apparel brand.